Representative Kate. Yes. I'm going by there. Welcome, welcome.
You folks first.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chair Meek, Vice Chair McLean, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Janine Solomon. I'm the state senator for Senate District 15, which includes areas of Forest Grove, Cornelius, Hillsborough, and the Rock Creek area of Western Washington County. I come to you today in support of Senate Bill 545 and sincerely appreciate this bipartisan and bicameral support. Oregonians from all corners of the state rely on volunteer firefighters to respond to traffic accidents, house fires, brush fires, wildfires that are becoming more frequent, and so many other events that happen outside of city limits in some of our most rural areas of the state. I know this all too well as I grew up in rural Western Washington County in Gales Creek. My parents ran the Gales Creek Mercantile, and my dad, retired from the Navy, was one of the 12 founding members in September of 1972 of the Gales Creek Volunteer Fire Department. The 12 members consisted of farmers, the retired, and the current working class men serving in the area. When we heard the siren ringing loudly across our small town, we knew that brave volunteers were being called to action. Middle of the day or middle of the night, they responded. And while many districts and departments are able to reimburse volunteers for direct costs like gas, they surely cannot cover missed family events and the risks that they take to help their neighbors. In the past session, President Courtney paid tribute to a fallen volunteer firefighter on the Senate floor, a tragic loss for St. Paul community. A modest $1,000 tax credit won't provide compensation for the sacrifices our volunteer firefighters make, but it will hopefully help encourage current volunteers to continue their service and potentially attract new ones. This by no means will make anyone wealthy or financially sound, but it may help alleviate a small financial burden and encourage more people to hear the call to service. Some volunteer firefighters utilize this extensive and intense training and experience as a means to climbing the career ladder. Our rural communities benefit most from their volunteer service, and when I hear the one group of opposition, their argument, it bears no weight on me for this instance. I urge them to do a ride-along with their local fire departments for the experience. In this time of catastrophic wildfires, we need all hands on deck to help Oregonians. We know that from the cost of our most recent special session. This tax credit is a mere drop in the fire bucket. We can make a difference to so many lives, but especially rural lives. Colleagues, I encourage your support of Senate Bill 545, a bipartisan, bicameral, urban, and rural bill for all of Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Meek, Vice Chair McLean, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jamie Kate, and I'm the state representative for House District 11, serving rural parts of Lynn and Marion counties. And I honestly can't tell you at this point how many times I have given testimony for this bill, and I really hope we're coming towards the end and finally get it across the finish line. This bill is simple: the creation of a $1,000 tax credit for our volunteer firefighters to aid in recruitment efforts and retention of our volunteers across the state. I'm sure you'll hear that it's not equitable to allow state dollars through the form of a tax credit to benefit our volunteer firefighters. But in response, I'd ask you how many different fire jurisdictions you travel through to get to the Capitol from your home each day. Those jurisdictions that you expect to answer your call for 911 to help you in your time of need. My drive isn't far, a little less than an hour, and yet I travel through 5. And I only pay into one of those jurisdictions' tax bases. Those emergency personnel aren't going to check my address before deciding if they're going to help me in my time of need. They're just going to do their job, helping to save lives regardless of which jurisdiction you live in. The fact is, all Oregonians benefit from our fire districts and departments having adequate staffing and resources. I'm sure you'll hear that the criteria to qualify for this tax credit needs tightened up to only cover those responding to calls. To which I'd offer that the criteria outlined ensure only truly active volunteers will meet the threshold and also coincides with existing criteria our fire chiefs are already evaluating, lessening the burden on them. The initial training for volunteer firefighters is no small ask of time away from work and family, and the ongoing year-round trainings just to maintain their certifications are beyond any I have ever seen in numerous volunteer groups I've been a part of. And the criteria really allow for the range of services our fire districts perform for our communities beyond just the stereotypical work of responding to calls that people often expect. And though I highly doubt you'll hear anyone say it out loud that our volunteer firefighters just aren't worth a $1,000 tax credit, I want to share that each volunteer firefighter contributes an average service value of $50,000 per year to the service district they are volunteering with. And when you have districts with incredibly limited tax bases who may be lucky to have the financial resources to have one part-time paid position, volunteers are often the only help available to answer the call of need over vast swaths of our state. I want to read a couple little snippets of an email I received from a fire chief on the coast. 95% of our staffing is volunteer. Dedicated volunteers are few and far between in rural areas. And also, the coastal crowds no longer have a season. We are busy 12 months of the year, and there is little support for volunteers who tirelessly take calls 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year. That same sentiment is shared by so many fire districts across our state, and we have an opportunity to acknowledge the sacrifices our volunteers make, those who put their lives on the line to protect others, and who bear personal financial cost to even serve. Senate Bill 545 is a great opportunity to show our volunteer firefighters how critical they are to Oregon's emergency response system and how very much we appreciate them. I really hope you'll help consider this a priority for this session and get it across the finish line this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome, Senator.
Chair Meek, Vice Chair McLean, members of the committee, my name is Jeff Golden. I represent Senate District 3, much of the Rogue Valley, and I appreciate the opportunity to come testify in support of Senate Bill 545. Also want to thank my colleagues for bringing focus to this issue. For me, this is a rare exception to a rule I tried to follow on this committee. Chair Meek is smiling. He remembers a lot of conversations in my 2 years where I had the privilege of and pleasure of serving on this committee, where we heard just a long series of proposals for credits, exemptions, carve-outs, deductions from different taxes. I think the one we talked about most was the corporate activities tax. And we heard very compelling cases made about why a certain activity should be exempted from that tax. And we had numerous conversations that if we do that, it's a good idea. We ought to do this in terms of policy. We need to pay for it. And we had a number of discussions about looking at the CAT tax broadly and figuring out if we want to do some carve-outs, how do we offset that with other adjustments? There are ways to do that. I felt that was important because I felt at the time that our funds, especially our general fund, are oversubscribed with vital needs from Oregonians. And I think that's even more so this session. I think we're going to see vital services that we may be unable to fund or fund adequately because of the state of our revenue. And another discussion for me, I'm going to resist a speech about our needs for wildfire funding right now, but that's one of a number of items that we're going to be struggling with over time. This is an exception because our volunteer fire force is providing an astonishingly important piece of our overall wildfire system. It's grim to think where we would be without their efforts. And I've never done this work professionally or as a volunteer, but it's enormously demanding work, obviously dangerous in some fashion. And it's kind of a miracle when you step back that these men and women are willing to step up as volunteers to do this work. It's astonishing. And as has been said, $1,000 isn't going to substantially change their financial condition, but it's a recognition of how grateful we are for the contribution they're making to the state of Oregon. I would really hope that, we're going to be talking about wildfire funding and how we establish an adequate and reliable source. I would really like to think we can succeed at that effort to the point where we could more realistically and reasonably compensate these people. But let's at least do this and make a meaningful statement about what their service means to us and their communities in the state of Oregon. Thank you very much. I really invite your strong support of this measure.
Well, thank you. And before this panel leaves, any questions? Yes, Senator Patterson.
Thank you so much, Chair Meek. Thank you so much for this. This was really critical and crucial and hard. People don't have a heart attack at between 9 to 5, and volunteer firefighters often are the first responders in medical emergencies too. My brother's a volunteer firefighter. My next door neighbor, my cousin, growing up, very important work. My only question is this. How do you track who is an active volunteer and who likes red trucks and shows up for the meetings?
Chair Meek, Senator Patterson, that's an excellent question, and where our basis for the criteria that they have to meet and be signed off by the chief is actually aligned with an existing recognition that is in the fire service industry. But let's see, they have to respond to a minimum of 10% of calls for assistance received by the volunteer firefighter, participate in at least 60 training hours, participate in at least one community engagement event not described in paragraph D of the subsection, and participate in at least 20 hours of public education service delivering information about the fire safety or prevention, or earn a certificate approved by the Department of Public Safety Standards and training and available to fire service professionals. And I think it's that they have to meet at least 2 of the criteria in that list. And so those are really things that they can't, even just the training, that I think it's like 70 hours over the course of a year. So it is a substantial commitment on them to be able to meet those criteria, to earn that recognition within the fire service, and thus also be able to be signed off by their fire chief that they are a truly active volunteer and would qualify for the credit.
Yes, and Senator Solomon would like to answer that
Yeah,
too.
thank you, Chair Meek and Senator Patterson for that question. And I would say that thank you to Representative Kate. It clearly explained in the bill what is there is ongoing training even. Like I even witnessed recently in Gales Creek, seeing them out and continuing their training while they were on volunteer fire duty. And so it is continual. And then as well as written in the bill, these are folks that are well beyond liking of that red truck. It is quite intense training, physical, emotional, mental.
Senator Taylor.
I guess I just have a question, and maybe for staff or for you, Senator Meek. Is that so? If establishing this new tax credit, so it would be reviewed every 6 years?
Yeah, Senator Taylor, the tax credit, it does have an applicability, which is the standard 6 years applicability. And so, yes, it would be added to the list for review. And so this one would come up to review. It could be, it's up to the legislature, of course, but it could be in like 2029 or the 2031. It's usually the year before it's scheduled to sunset in the upcoming biennium. So yes, to be part of that list.
Okay, and so is follow-up?
Yes.
And then just regarding costs, so I was just reading this, so if it's 8,700, whatever, so it's 8,760,000, is the math that simple, Carl?
Yes, Senator, pretty close to that. It's not a refundable credit, so you do need tax liability to be able to take it. But yeah, when we've looked at this in the past, depending on the specific, we've seen this bill before, it's
Right.
been slightly different. You're looking at $6 to up to $8 million per year is kind of what we've been expecting, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
well,
when I
yeah,
was on the Revenue Committee before, this bill came forward, and obviously, we want to make certain that we are acknowledging all the hard work of our volunteer firefighters, especially as of late, with everything that's happened. And just acknowledging that this has come before the committee in the past, and it's a hard decision because a lot of other entities are also looking for, to have some sort of a system to acknowledge other people who are doing really arduous work for the state that step up. So it's just an ongoing, difficult decision, so.
No, thank you, Senator Taylor, and thank you for the questions. It will be my responsibility, this committee's responsibility, our body's responsibility to look at the full potential revenue impact. And until we schedule a work session, we won't get the BizRiz. So, but we will do that research to find out what type of impact it could be. I'm going to be working with the presiding officers and Ways and Means co-chairs to see if I have a check account that or a fund that I can work with and draw from to say this is my allowance to have this body support different programs in the state that would have a revenue impact. But in this case, what we're looking to do, we would be spending the money on the front side. And so we're looking to make sure that this committee has a ledger in which we have a budget to, support programs like this. So to me, I think this is a very important active responsibility that these volunteers are providing, keeping us safe, being at the ready. And so I think this definitely raises itself to being a potential, something we need to do. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We'll call up Representative Boyce.
Well, good morning, Chair Meek, Vice Chair McLean, and Senate Revenue and Finance Committee. I couldn't add a lot to what my colleagues just presented there. Who in this room doesn't love firefighters? Court Boyce for the record, State Representative, District 1, Coos County, parts Douglas County, and all of Curry County. So fires have been a big issue. And as we prepare for the 2025 season, I wish I could say I thought of this bill, but alas, I cannot. I'm very excited to be here and support it. Sometimes our firefighters are the first ones to fire. I have 74 in our 3 counties, different fire departments, and almost all of those are unpaid and volunteers. There are 8,800, as I'm sure you've heard that stat in the past, 8,800 volunteer fire departments in Oregon. So this is a small bill or a small step, but I think it's a very good step. Just really excited to support it. And I thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Representative Boyce. Any questions? We're going to be listening to a lot of other testimony too, and we appreciate your coming this morning.
Thanks again, sir.
You're welcome. All righty. Thank you. Now we have the legislative introducers completed. I'd like to put on notice we have Josie, I think it's Cone?
Yes.
And then Genoa Ingram. So Josie, please introduce yourself. You can turn on your camera.
Oh,
And then on deck will be Genoa and then Megan Dennison.
Chair Meek, Vice Chair McLean, members of the Finance Committee. For the record, my name is Josie Kerner. I am a small forest owner speaking today on behalf of Tax Fairness Oregon, an all-volunteer advocacy group dedicated to supporting a rational and equitable tax code. In preparing these comments, I consulted with Matt Alto, Battalion Chief and Training Officer for the Estacada Fire District. His comments are attached separately in written testimony. SB545's $1,000 tax credit would cost $8.7 million for the 8,700 existing volunteer firefighters across the state, but does little to address the problem of the decline in volunteer firefighters. We propose a solution that will cost much less, but be a far better tool than a tax credit in attracting new volunteer firefighter recruits and retaining those we have. John Calhoun, also of Tax Fairness Oregon, will comment on tax credits in his comments. I will outline an alternate solution. The barriers to volunteer firefighting, recruitment, and retention across the state are the exorbitant costs required for training and the high cost of personal protection equipment, PPE. Our proposal is to provide $10,000 per recruit to the 288 registered fire departments across the state once their volunteers have completed their training and are ready to combat fires. This will help attract recruits. New recruits must undergo extensive initial training and an additional 144 hours of training to become EMTs, typically costing $1,500. We do have a credit, but it's a big expense. In addition, the cost for each recruit's PPE is about $5,000. These costs are currently paid for by the recruits themselves or from the small budgets of the individual fire departments. This is especially problematic in rural areas with low property taxes to pay for fire protection. The cost to train and outfit 500 volunteers would be $5 million. Why should the state, rather than the local property tax assessments, compensate fire departments for training and PPE for their recruits? The answer is that the new volunteer firefighters will reduce the general fund's growing costs for wildfire mitigation with rapid growth on the ground throughout the state. A stronger volunteer workforce saves taxpayers millions in dollars by reducing the state's firefighting budget for personnel expenses and by preventing losses from property and damage. This proposal would be far more efficient than each fire department applying for individual grants as they do now, with various reporting requirements. We urge you to consider our written proposal. Thanks for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Josie. Just 1 second, please. Any questions? I'm reading the testimony, and I heard you. I don't understand what your recommendation is.
Oh, that we
In
give
the
a
same
direct,
plain, simple terms, I don't understand what you're asking.
a direct appropriation is what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Not
okay.
a tax credit.
To each fire district?
To each fire department, and then when they're volunteers, first of all, they could recruit with this using, put a flyer out locally for recruitment, but say, we're going to pay for your PPE, we're going to, reimburse you for your expenses when you, so.
Okay.
It's go directly to the fire departments, and then they do the recruitment using with this as attraction.
Great, thank you, John. That's helpful for me. And just for the record, conflicting, your letter in written testimony says you oppose this bill, but your testimony for writing in today said you were neutral. So just curious, are you neutral or opposed?
No, we're opposed to a tax credit. We think a direct appropriation is the right way to go.
Okay.
We just whittling away our revenue every time we give away a tax credit. It's not a good way to if you really believe in supporting your fire department, give them the direct appropriation to pay for their PPE and training. It's a lot of training.
Great.
Many hours.
Well,
Read
you.
that Alto's testimony.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. For clarification, then on deck is Genoa. At the table is Genoa, and then next on deck is Megan Dennison.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Meek, members of the committee. I first of all want to thank Senators Golden and Solomon and Representatives Kate and Boyce for the support of the bill. I am Genoa Ingram, Executive Director of the Oregon Fire District Directors Association and the Oregon Volunteer Firefighters Association, both partners in public safety. The fire district directors, for those who may not be familiar, those are special districts, and the fire district directors are the elected officials that oversee the the fire districts as far as their budgets and hiring the chief, et cetera. Those, they are the people who make the fire districts run. The volunteers, many of the fire district directors will tell you, are the ones who really make the fire districts run. In June, I would like to invite each of you to one of our trainings. The Oregon Volunteer Firefighters Association holds a training conference once per year, and they try to move it around the state. They do move it around the state so that people don't always have to come to Salem and go to the DPSST campus in order to get their training. We try to keep it affordable. We try to keep it relevant to what people need for their certification. This June, it will be out at Chemeketa at the Brooks campus. And if you're expecting to go to a conference where you're getting a lecture, you will be very disappointed. We have people donate vehicles for their vehicle extrication. They do water rescue, high-angle rescue. If you come out and visit and watch that training, you will see training that is pertinent to the types of activities that are required of them. I should say both of these associations do support Senate Bill 545. I want to correct something. There are approximately, and the number fluctuates widely, but there are approximately 8760 volunteers throughout the state. Not every one of those is going to qualify for a $1,000 tax credit. Please understand, when I surveyed my board, I believe there's only one individual who said, oh, none of the others had a tax obligation that would benefit from that, from that. But it is a significant showing of appreciation, if you will, for the volunteer firefighters. And it's something that I feel a little funny coming up here to testify because I've been giving the same testimony for 25 years. And I know that some of you could probably give it, especially Senator Starr, could probably give my testimony better than I. But when we look at it, it's really those who have a tax obligation, and it would be a credit against that obligation, and not all 8,700 are going to be able to qualify. Everyone, it's already been addressed as far as the criteria. We appreciate that. Couple of things. My first introduction to volunteer firefighters was when I was chief lobbyist, oddly enough, for the Oregon Association of Realtors. And I was away at a conference, and my house caught fire. And I am very, very, very rural, Polk County. I mean, it's way out there. And I have a little 10-acre farm. And by the time I arrived at 5 o'clock in the morning, the house was gone. When I drove up to my driveway, I was used to seeing a big home silhouetted against as the sun was rising. And what I saw was a row of trees. And I was able to get close enough to see what was going on. And those volunteer firefighters at 5 o'clock in the morning were still there. They had their coffee cups, and they were fishing my fish out of the pond to save them. It's true, I was very rural. They weren't able to save my home, but they saved all of my outbuildings, all of my animals. I didn't lose a single horse, alpaca, miniature donkey, any. They were all saved, and I appreciate that so much. And I thought, if I have the chance to help them, I will help the volunteer firefighters. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak on their behalf. My board did have a discussion yesterday. It was mentioned just a few moments ago about the Oregon Rural Volunteer EMS Provider Tax Credit. On the second page of the bill, line 12, it said a credit may not be allowed under this section for any tax year for which a credit is claimed under ORS 315622. That's the EMS. That is a $250 tax credit. It doesn't say, obviously it says you can't apply for both. My guess would be if people do have a tax obligation, they would apply for the higher one. It's also what I found in a survey of my board and some of our members. It's very difficult to qualify for the $250 tax credit because you have to be 30 miles away from a hospital. So you're very, very rural, and there weren't very many people who I found who qualified for that. So that tax credit, the EMS tax credit, will sunset, I believe, December of 2026. So there would be a 12-month overlap during which volunteer firefighters would need to choose which one they want to apply for. With that, I know you've all heard me talk about volunteer firefighters over the years, so I will stop and entertain any questions that you may have, or just thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you. Any questions? Great information. Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
helpful. Thanks so much. Welcome, Megan. And then on deck will be a panel of Brian Stewart and Ben Stange.
Good morning, Chair Meek, members of the committee. For the record, Megan Dennison with the Oregon Department of Revenue. The department has submitted written testimony to this bill, so I will hit a couple of highlights. We appreciate that there's a certification of this credit, and we are looking forward to some, we appreciated the information about how many folks potentially qualify for this credit. If this bill is approved, our intent is to convene a Rules Advisory Committee involving fire departments and fire districts so that we could create a certification process that will limit the burden of additional tasks required for the reporting of these individuals, as well as creating the form that we would need. And then, as has been pointed out a couple times by Mr. Easton and the last witness, Section 2 sub 7 with the rural EMS and this really could be interpreted to, if they claim both the $250 and the $1,000, that we would deny the $1,000 credit. We don't really believe that that's probably the intent of this bill. And so we would suggest an amendment to clarify that the credit is either the greater of the two credits or that the total of the two credits together is maybe $1,000 if that's what the intent is. And so we would appreciate if there was an amendment to clarify that. And other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Looking at your written testimony here, and I'm thankful for that written explanation. So we look further into this, we will make sure that it's clear that what we expect, what the intended consequences or intended benefits are. So just for clarification, though, on the record while we're in this meeting, since you're from the Department of Revenue, two questions. You mentioned having to convene a Rules Advisory Committee, is that correct?
Correct.
And would DOR have a fiscal on that Rules Advisory Committee then to convene that on this bill?
We will look into it further when we get the request. At this point, I wouldn't anticipate just for a Rules Advisory Committee that we would have a fiscal.
Okay, that's good to know, just checking. And then finally, just for clarification, a worker, volunteer, has a different job, has, income coming in, has deductions taken out, files their tax return, and then they have a return coming instead of owing. If they have a tax return coming, do they get a credit against because they don't owe anything, right? So do they get a credit against or additional, or would they only get a credit if they actually owed taxes for that year?
So Chair Meek, this is a non-refundable credit. So the taxpayer would need to have a tax liability, and that's before their withholding. So they would have, let's say the taxpayer has $2,000 in tax, they get their exemption credit, they would get this credit, the $1,000 taken off, and then it just reduces the amount of tax that they're withholding or any estimated payments would be applied to.
Okay, so it could be a benefit even if they do have a refund coming.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I just wanted to clarify that. So thank you. Any other questions?
Well, just following on that logic, though, just so I understand that if a person, say, did not, it's only for people who have a tax liability.
Correct.
So some people who don't have a tax liability would not receive this benefit.
Chair Meek, Senator Taylor, that would be correct.
So-
Yeah. Just
Fair enough.
clarifying, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Tough
Appreciate
stuff.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And now I'd like to call up our folks from the Fire Chiefs Association, Chief Stewart and Chief Stange. Welcome.
Morning. Good morning, Chair Meek, Vice Chair McLean, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to share testimony in support of Senate Bill 545 today. Good morning. I am Brian Stewart. I am a director with the Oregon Fire Chiefs Association, and here on behalf of our state volunteer firefighters and the fire agencies that rely on them. Since 2007, I've had the opportunity to learn from, train with, fight fire together, perform rescues with, and serve the communities alongside volunteer firefighters. In my fire district, each of our volunteers serve 5 or more nights or weekend days a month out of volunteer-only staffed fire stations or on fire apparatus with other career firefighters. That's 1/6 of their evenings or weekend time that they commit to serving their communities. When I came to my organization in 2012, my organization had approximately 80 active volunteer firefighters. Today, that number sits around 40 to 50. That's a dramatic decrease in a decade. Most of Oregon fire agencies are combination staffed like mine, and nearly a third of Oregon fire agencies are staffed solely with volunteers. They are required to meet the same basic requirements for firefighting, hazmat, and other hazards as any career firefighter. They're required to meet appropriate EMS certification requirements. They are their community's all-hazard first responders. It takes time, energy, and sacrifice. Volunteering as a firefighter is hard, dangerous, time-intensive, and terribly inconvenient. In my various leadership roles over the years, I've worked to accommodate changes in schedules for duty shifts or response expectations, adjust training schedules, or whatever else volunteer firefighters have given feedback on in an effort to meet their needs and improve retention. I've done so because I've sat with our volunteer firefighters and I've heard and seen the impacts that volunteering has on their firefighters and their families. One thing I have not been able to provide is a tax credit, which in 2022, the LPRO's report on volunteer firefighter recruitment and retention survey identified tax credits among the top tools to retain volunteer firefighters. Senate Bill 545 can help ensure the solvency of Oregon's local fire agency staffing by providing a tax credit which our firefighters themselves shared that will help in retention. Volunteer firefighters are the majority of firefighters in Oregon. They are critical for our response locally and for our state mutual aid system. You may be familiar with that from conflagrations, but that occurs every day as we cross boundaries and go between all the agencies that Representative Kate shared that she drives through. Despite the critical service they provide, we know that our volunteer numbers are in decline. And while some agencies can augment their service with additional career staffing to partially offset declining volunteerism, Oregon's future remains one where volunteers will be needed to provide essential life safety services across the state. When my family needs help, it won't matter what color the fire engine is, what agency name is on the side of the rig, or whether the firefighters are paid or volunteer. What matters is that they arrive quickly, being efficient and technically competent, and with compassion for those they are serving. That describes our Oregon volunteers. Oregon wants volunteer firefighters, and we need them. Providing a tax credit to eligible, active volunteers is a prudent step to recognize those who serve and help retain their experience and maintain our local and state response capability. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony, and I encourage your support of Senate Bill 545. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Stewart.
Thank you, Chair Meek, Vice Chair McLean, members of the committee. My name is Ben Stange. I'm the Fire Chief of Polk County Fire District Number 1. I'm here not only on behalf of them, but as the President and Fire Service Representative for Special Districts Association of Oregon's fire districts. We have 255 member fire districts spanning the entire state of Oregon. I want to talk for a second to start about what makes volunteer firefighting so special. And so as the chair said, a lot of people want a tax credit. Why is this unique? And if I could speak just briefly to that, what's unique about this is these are members of our community who just to start their volunteer work require over 120 hours of training. After they complete that, they are required by DPSST to engage annually in 60 additional hours, a minimum every single year, not for a career job, but to volunteer for their community, a minimum of 60 hours every single year, in order to have a volunteer schedule that is completely unpredictable. One of the volunteers who came with me today, Monday morning, about 5 a.m., we unfortunately had a fatal traffic crash. He left his family that morning, went on the traffic crash. This is his volunteer work, goes back home to see his kids off to school, and then he goes to his regular job. That's their daily life. So why is this group deserving of it? Because our entire public safety system in Oregon, the safety of this state, relies on thousands and thousands of volunteers in every community doing this exact same thing. All Oregonians just about rely on volunteer firefighters. As Chief Stewart said, in 2022, I was privileged to sit on that capacity work group. And how do we know this tax credit would matter? Because of the 52 different options that volunteers in this survey done by LPRO from across the state responded to. Of the 52 options, our current volunteers, when asked what would retain them, their number 2 answer was tax credit. That was the number 2 thing that they said, that our volunteers said to us, would help them to continue to serve. And what would that be used for? Well, as I said, there's not a consistent schedule. So our volunteers, when they do a live fire training, that's going to go all day on a Saturday. With that tax credit, they could look at it and say, I'll get that babysitter. I know that's going to be covered. I'm going to be taken care of. I'm getting a tax credit. I can pay for that. When they have that tool in their gear that they know, that flashlight, that little tool that they know helps them be a better firefighter, they can make that purchase and say, you know what, this is covered. But also to what Senator Golden said about our broader wildfire capacity workforce. We sent crews, many of us did. I sent 2 engines and a half a dozen firefighters down to California for 18 days. And our volunteers stepped up just like they do every summer in Oregon. And that is, we send people on conflagrations all over the state. And we tell our volunteers, look, it's going to be a rough week because we're still going to get calls here at home. Our forces are depleted. We've sent career and volunteer across the state. So we need extra from you. When you're sitting at dinner with your spouse, having a great conversation, we need you to leave. I know you're exhausted from work this week and you might need a little extra sleep, but this week, we need you to get out of bed. And if you're doing a story with your kid, that's great, but just this week, if you can just put the book down, we really need you. And they do it over and over again. And this credit not only helps reimburse some of those costs that I talked about, but it shows them that we see them and that we appreciate them. And it not only says that to them, but it says it to the people who are honestly sacrificing the most in this whole situation, and that is their families. And so I would encourage your support of Senate Bill 545, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Senator Patterson.
Thank you so much, Chair Megan, and thank you both. And thank you to all the paid staff you have as well, and to all of our volunteers. I know you work really, you're always there. Thank you. Quick question. What was number 1 on the survey?
Chair Meek, Vice Chair McLean, Senator Patterson, number 1 was compensation. It barely, I believe, by 1 point inched out state tax credit as the number 1 for volunteers.
A follow-up, Chair Meek?
Yes.
But there's no compensation for volunteers, so that was among the paid people, right?
Affirm.
Okay, thank you.
Well, to clarify that, there's not enough budget even to provide a good, firefighting force because of the tax base that you're able to work with. So you rely on your volunteers to backfill that need. So that's what you just don't have a budget for more firefighters. So the volunteer process is necessary in order to provide that coverage, correct?
Chair Meek, that's correct.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much. And please stay in the room because we have one more witness coming up and is in opposition. I might need you to come back and clarify any of those points, okay?
Certainly, appreciate it. Thank you all
so much. And then I'd like to welcome up John Calhoun from Tax Fairness Oregon.
Morning, Senator Meek, Vice Chair McLean, members of the committee. My name is John Calhoun, and I'm representing Tax Fairness Oregon, a network of volunteers who advocate a rational and equitable tax code. SB545 is one of 4 different bills this session that call for an income tax credit for volunteer firefighters. We should all be concerned about the risk of fires, and especially rural wildfires in Oregon. Since volunteer firefighters are often our first line of defense, whether dealing with highway accidents or wildfires, the fact that recruiting volunteers has become more difficult should concern everyone. The discussion today should be whether $1,000 per year tax credit will be a meaningful solution to this problem. In the 23 session, a similar tax credit bill was proposed and not passed. Instead, $5 million was allocated through the general fund in HB 2294 to make grants to local service districts and local joint committees to develop and administer pilot projects that provide firefighter apprenticeship training. The bill envisioned up to 10 different pilot projects across the state. We should be asking what we have learned so far. If one or more of these pilot projects shows promise, the legislature should reinforce that work with additional outlays from the general fund. It can be less costly and probably more effective to help fund training and equipment through roughly 300 fire districts, as my associate Josie Cohen explained, rather than providing every one of our close to 9,000 volunteers with $1,000 each. It is not at all clear that providing a $1,000 credit will motivate enough volunteers to make a difference. If a credit is too small to impact behavior, the state will simply be throwing away funds that are needed to deal with our fire and wildfire crisis. We should not be chewing up our budget just to show volunteers they are appreciated, even though they are. Pragmatically, there are over 60 bills that have been filed this session dealing with tax credits, with more coming. Many of them are also designed to address problems in rural communities. You legislators will have a very difficult time deciding which, if any, can be funded this year, since we are already facing a $100 million deficit.
Very good. Any questions? That is a good. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, that exhausts our list of witnesses on this bill this morning, Senate Bill 545. So we will be discussing, I'll be working with Vice Chair McLean and staff to see potential implications, costs, and relevant outcomes. And we'll be discussing with this committee, the potential of seeing this again in the future, maybe coming back to hear it again, or scheduling a work session. So thank you so much. And so at this time, I will be closing the public hearing on Senate Bill 545. And thank you all witnesses for coming this morning. And then opening a public hearing